With the 2022 midterm elections coming up in the US Congress oh so soon, I think it's a good idea for me to just remind folks, or maybe in some cases educate them for the first time, about a particular aspect of democracy that all too often gets overlooked. Democracy, of course, is a major issue on the ballot in these midterm elections. We're hearing all kinds of rhetoric, mainly from the Democratic Party, about how Trump and his millions of minions pose this clear and present danger to American democracy, and frankly, I tend to sympathize. I tend to agree. But why? What is the exact nature of that threat, at least first and foremost? Part of the problem is, and I'm not sure that most Americans, or most Canadians for that matter, are well educated about this particular aspect of democracy. A friend of mine told me years ago in a private Facebook conversation, democracy is civil war without guns. Civil war without guns. Think on that for a moment. In a literal civil war, you have two, sometimes more than two, rival political factions within a single society, a single polity, competing with each other violently through brute force to try to seize political power, to try to seize control of the government and impose their vision of how the society should be governed on the society by brute force. In a democracy, you have often more than two, I would say usually more than two, but in some countries like the United States, it's mainly two parties that have a chance of actually winning, two political factions represented by political parties that compete peacefully for political power. Instead of using guns and other weapons to try to seize power through violence and then using power to impose their ideas about how the society should be run on that society, instead they try to win power. They try to earn power by earning the support of the adult citizen population. In other words, the electorate, the voters. They fight with ballots instead of bullets. That's democracy. In any society, in any community with more than 2 or 3 members, you're going to find disagreements about how the society should be run, how it should be governed, what that government should or should not do. And the thing is, each faction is pretty hell-bent on winning power because it's pretty firmly convinced that it and only it has the right ideas about how to run the society. Every faction thinks everybody would be better off, or at least most of society would be better off, if they and only they were calling all the shots.
We need a system where the politicians sit down and discuss the problem, agree what's in the best interest of all the people, and then do it.
That's exactly what we do. The trouble is that people don't always agree.
So how do you work out that inevitable political competition?
Well, then they should be made to.
By whom? Who's gonna make them?
I don't know. Someone.
You?
Of course not me.
But someone.
Someone wise.
Sounds an awful lot like a dictatorship to me.
Well, if it works.
You do it by setting up a system in which everybody understands that the way for us to try to win, to rack up as many W's as possible instead of L's, is to win popular support at the ballot box. But in order for that kind of system to work, everybody has to be on the same page about the ground rules. It's similar to any other type of competition. Any type of competition, game, no matter how serious or frivolous it may be, can't function unless there are at least some rules and unless the players are willing to abide by the rules. Substantially, at least. And this is one aspect of democracy that I don't think is that well understood at the popular grassroots level. Most people intuitively get that, okay, in a democracy, the people are supposed to rule, the people's elected representatives are going to be accountable to them, the right to govern is derived from the consent of the governed. Most people get that on some basic level, but they're not necessarily as familiar with the political competition, peaceful competition aspect of the system. In order for that system to work, people need to be willing to accept defeat. The idea is you have periodic elections every 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It really depends where you are in the world. It varies from country to country. But periodically, even if your political party, your faction, your movement loses a particular election, you can always look forward to the next one. You can live to fight again another day. Losing once doesn't mean you lose every time, at least not necessarily. You have to be willing to take an L every now and then, especially in a country as politically polarized as the United States is today, and look forward to the next election, as well as to the inevitable maneuvering and partisan jockeying for position and power that goes on in the legislative process in between elections, when the actual work of governing gets done. What's the problem in American democracy today? One of the country's 2 major parties is under the sway of a man who refuses ever to accept defeat. Donald Trump refuses to admit when he has lost something fair and square, no matter what the facts are, no matter what the evidence indicates. This is a man who spent all of the entire 2016 and 2020 election campaigns claiming that those elections were somehow being rigged against him. In both cases, he made that claim months, sometimes a year or more, before a single vote had been cast. You know what the hell of it is? And I've never understood why Democrats have not used this more to their advantage. He actually admitted it. This is a man who actually admitted that he is a whiner. In the summer of 2015, soon after he first announced his candidacy for president in the 2016 election, he did a phone-in interview on CNN in which he was asked about his insistence that the election was somehow being rigged, and he actually said this.
I am the most fabulous whiner. I do whine because I want to win, and I'm not happy if I'm not winning. Are whiners winners? And I am a whiner, and I'm a whiner, and I keep whining and whining until I win.
There you have it, folks. Straight from the horse's ass's mouth. The man actually admitted that he's a whiny crybaby who just doesn't like to admit when he's lost something. I whine because I want to win, and I whine until I win. He said the quiet part out loud. And that kind of attitude is corrosive to any democratic society. It's inherently toxic. Because if you're never going to admit when you lose an election, how are you supposed to keep this system going in which you have neutral rules that apply to everyone and everyone is on the same page about the validity of those rules, and at least there's a broad consensus in the society at any rate about the validity of those rules. Those various political factions get to compete peacefully, non-violently, for political power. In order for a system like that to work, all the parties involved, or at least most of them, have to be willing to take an L every now and then. But Trump refuses to do that, and millions of Republicans are following in his footsteps.
It was always a lie. The whole thing was always a lie. And it was a lie meant to rile people up. And, I've talked about this ad nauseum. It really made me angry. Because I'm like, the promises you're making that you're going to challenge the Electoral College and overturn the election, there's not even a process for you to do that. It doesn't even exist. So I was like, what the hell are we doing? And I would tell that to people kind of behind closed doors too, especially a lot of the rabble-rousers, like the political personalities, not even the politicians. We definitely had the arguments behind closed doors in the Republican Party before that. But even just the others, they're like, yeah, we know that. But we just, people just need their last hurrah. Like they just need to feel like we fought one last time.
With election deniers being elected or trying to be elected across the country, seeking positions like state secretaries of state, where they can be in control of the counting process for determining the outcomes of future elections, particularly in 2024.
A quiet mobilization of money by people who are fighting to reclaim what they believe was stolen from them, and who are seeking to change not only who can vote in this country, but who counts those votes. An attempt to reshape our election system without any of us really knowing.
Remember the first rule of politics. The ballots don't make the results. The counters make the results. The counters keep counting.
Basically, they've been positioning themselves to steal the next election on Trump's behalf. Even though, of course, they keep claiming that the last election was somehow stolen from them, from him, which is nonsense. That is the fundamental challenge to American democracy. But in order to counter it, at least on an intellectual level, on a moral level, people need to understand that dimension of democracy. I think Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst system of government known to man, except for all the alternatives. Nothing is perfect in this world, not even democracy. And of course it has its flaws. I think right now we're in a period where we're seeing one of the flaws in democracy, not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world too. Look at any number of countries around the world where years ago, even within this century, democracy seemed to be alive and well, and now all of a sudden, seemingly out of the blue, within less than the past decade, suddenly democracy is in peril. The truth is, the system was always fragile, intrinsically fragile, because it's always depended on the willingness of its participants to play by the rules. And it's always going to be tempting, in politics especially, to want to cheat and break those rules, or just throw the rules out the window altogether, which is what happens when you have an autocracy or even a full-blown dictatorship in power. So, I think something that a former Prime Minister of Canada, whom I had the honor of meeting years ago, John Turner, once said, will forever remain true. Democracy just doesn't work on its own. We've got to make it work.
Democracy doesn't happen by accident. You gotta make it happen.
Couldn't have said it better myself.